Thanks, and welcome to the Wednesday, August 30th, 2023 meeting of the Redmond Planning Commission. I'll call this meeting to order and start with a roll call. Commissioner Woodyear.
Present.
Commissioner Aparna.
Present.
Commissioner Sheffrin. Present. Commissioner Nueva Camina.
Present.
Vice Chair Weston.
Present.
And I am Chair Sherry Nichols. Commissioner Van Nyman is excused this evening. Also joining us tonight and extending their workday are staff members Chris Wyatt, Kim Dietz, Jeff Churchill, Jenny Liebeck, and Ian Lefcourt, and we appreciate their help. I need a motion to amend the agenda before we approve it. We would like to remove item 5, Redmond 2050 Overlake Incentives Update Briefing, because staff member Becky Fry is feeling under the weather tonight and is not able to be with us. So we want to postpone that. But I do want to urge everybody, if you have questions or comments on this item, to go ahead and send them an email to Becky.
Motion to amend.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 And with that amendment, do I have a motion to approve the amended agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And we have a approved amended agenda. This is the point in the meeting where we take items from the audience on any item that is not the subject of a public hearing. Do we have someone for tonight?
We have David M.
Go for it, David.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. I'm David Morton. I live in Redmond, 98053. To comply with Redmond's draft Green Building Incentive Program, or GBP, a building must meet specific energy use intensity, or EUI, targets. EUI is a measure of energy efficiency commonly used in buildings to quantify the amount of energy consumed per unit of floor area. EUI targets set specific goals for reducing energy consumption, which in turn can lead to a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Here's how EUI targets contribute to greenhouse gas emissions reduction. First, energy efficiency improvements. EUI targets encourage building occupants to adopt energy-efficient electric technologies, equipment, appliances, and practices. By reducing energy waste and optimizing energy consumption, less energy is required to achieve the desired results. This directly leads to lower greenhouse gas emissions, as a significant portion of global emissions come from the burning of fossil fuels to generate electricity. Second, renewable energy adoption. EUI targets often include a focus on increasing the use of renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, and hydroelectric power. Switching to renewable energy sources reduces reliance on fossil fuels and decreases the associated emissions. Puget Sound Energy reports that 63% of the electricity it supplies to its customers is generated by burning fossil fuels, mostly natural gas, coal, and unspecified fuel. Third, behavioral changes. Setting EUI targets encourages building occupants or employees to adopt energy-saving behaviors. These changes might include turning up the temperature setting of the thermostat in summer, turning it down in winter, turning off lights when not needed, using energy-efficient equipment or appliances, and keeping or properly maintaining them. Such behavioral changes can cumulatively lead to reduced energy consumption and emissions. Fourth, technological innovation. EUI targets drive innovation in energy-efficient technologies and practices. As people strive to meet these targets, they may utilize more efficient processes, systems, and products. This continuous innovation contributes to overall emissions reduction. Fifth, long-term benefits. Achieving EUI targets often requires upfront investments in energy-efficient upgrades and technologies. While these investments may have initial costs, they lead to long-term cost savings due to reduced energy bills. This financial incentive encourages people to pursue energy efficiency, leading to greenhouse gas emissions reduction over time. Sixth, regulatory compliance and reporting. The City of Redmond will require that the EUI data be shared with the city via the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. Sharing this energy benchmarking data can motivate people to take greenhouse gas emissions reduction seriously and prioritize energy efficiency measures. And seventh, social responsibility. Many people prioritize sustainability and environmental responsibility as part of their social responsibility. EUI targets align with these goals, demonstrating a commitment to reducing people's carbon footprints and contributing to a cleaner environment. Overall, EUI targets play a crucial role in helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by promoting energy efficiency and encouraging the adoption of cleaner energy sources and practices. The effectiveness of these targets depends on the stringency of the targets, the commitment of the people involved, and the availability of resources to implement energy-saving measures. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And with that, we will move on to the Green Building Program Introduction Study Session. And I believe, Kim, you're going to start us off.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Kimberly Dietz, Principal Planner with Current Planning and Economic Development. And I'm here this evening just to set the stage for what Jenny Liebeck is going to cover this evening, and that is the Green Building Incentive Program. The incentive program is located in our zoning code and is involved in the Redmond Zoning Code Rewrite Phase 2. You are reviewing several amendments that are part of this Phase 2 package and will continue to do so through the remainder of this year. The Green Building Program started to be developed, well, it is actually in the code today, but the amendment started to be developed as part of the rewrite in 2021. And staff spent several months developing the amendments and also work with a broad range of stakeholders. We now have well over 1,000 stakeholders that are either parties of record or following the zoning code rewrite. This is also in partnership with Redmond 2050. Anything that has relevance to current policy that is being reviewed under 2050 is going to be brought to you under that umbrella. And then those code amendments that stand alone, for example, process and code corrections, those will be brought to you at the very end of the process. So this one is one that has very strong relevance, both to the comprehensive plan for environmental sustainability, but also for Overlake. And that's what you are reviewing as part of Becky Fry's work this evening. So Jenny is going to describe the program for you. This is something that is an incentive-based program and available to developers in various ways throughout the city. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jenny Liebeck.
Great, that's a great intro. Thanks so much, Kim. So it's wonderful to be here with you all this evening. So again, I am Jenny Liebeck. I'm the Sustainability Program Manager at the city, and it's my responsibility to implement our Environmental Sustainability Action Plan. I work with lots of staff across the city to do that, but I spend a lot of my time specifically focused on climate and energy issues, and so things like heat pumps and working with some of our low-income community members to get heat pumps installed in their homes, all the way to updating some of our green building work. So, which brings me obviously here with you all tonight. So let's see. So as Kim mentioned, our Green Building Incentive Program lives in our zoning code. It's voluntary and provides land use incentives in exchange for buildings to meet certain green building certifications or other kind of sustainability techniques. So this program was actually developed back in 2011. It was kind of refreshed in 2016, and now we're revisiting it again to, again, realign it with our with our Environmental Sustainability Action Plan. And so goal for tonight is just to give you kind of a baseline understanding of our sustainability strategy, because that feeds directly into some of the recommendations we're providing. And then we're just going to do a high-level review of some of the elements of the Green Building Incentive Program. And again, as Kim mentioned, that feeds right into the Overlake discussion. So when you all do dive into the economic analysis and some of the incentives for Overlake, you'll have some of that baseline information for that conversation as well. Okay, so we're going to start kind of the highest level and start with kind of the state policy landscape. So you guys are going to get a little nerdy with me because I love this stuff. But I do want to acknowledge that the state climate policy landscape has fundamentally changed over the past 4 to 5 years. There has been a lot of great progress and great gains that have happened, specifically from kind of 2019, 2018 on. And so that just means that, again, a lot has changed since we refreshed the program in 2016. So I want to flag 3 policies in particular for you all this evening that are really relevant to our conversation. Starting first with the Clean Energy Transformation Act. So this law basically requires utilities like Puget Sound Energy to deliver 100% clean electricity to our community by 2045. That means that we want to build buildings that can eventually rely on that clean electricity rather than natural gas, which is obviously very carbon intensive and counter to our climate goals. The next that I want to highlight is the state energy code. So the energy code is actually working towards a state mandated 70% reduction in net energy use, or net energy consumption, I should say, by 2031. So that means that each code cycle will get increasingly stringent and more challenging requirements will be coming down from the state. And just for perspective, the 2018 energy code that we're working under is 30% more efficient. So, right, we need to get to 70. So we've got, that just means that we're going to see a lot more changes coming from the state. And yeah, so I'll just leave that there for now. I'll revisit that in a little bit. And then finally, I did want to highlight the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. So this law requires existing buildings in Washington that are 50,000 square feet and above to meet a certain energy use intensity target. So if they don't meet that energy use intensity target, they are then required to retrofit their buildings to meet it. And also I should note that square footage threshold has been lowered. So 50,000, it's now 20,000 square feet and above will be required to comply. So the city, actually the building you're sitting in, is required to comply with that law. We actually don't meet our energy use intensity target. For perspective, this is a LEED building. So we are working to improve that, and we're very close, but it's a very powerful law and a really great, we're fortunate to have it here in Washington. So the reason why this one is important too is because this is a core element of the Green Building Incentive Program. And so I will dive in on that here just in a second. So again, all these policies, and there are others too that the state has passed, these are instrumental in the city achieving its climate and sustainability goals. So we just want to be sure that we're working in concert with these efforts at the state level. Okay, so now we're zooming in at the local level. So we have 2 big policies that are driving the update for the Green Building Incentive Program, one of which being our 2020 Environmental Sustainability Action Plan. Commissioner Perna, you were very instrumental in that. Thank you so much. So the ESAP looks across the city to create basically a comprehensive strategy in how we're going to achieve our environmental goals and commitments. So I've noted a few of those here that directly tie back to buildings, but needless to say that there is a lot of work that we need to do, and we need to be using every lever that we can to get there. And also one of the near-term actions within the ESAP was to update our Green Building Incentive Program. And then also, Council did adopt a climate emergency declaration in 2020. This was just right on the heels of the ESAP adoption, and that also identified establishing green building standards for new construction, just to more quickly advance towards our goals. Okay, so what are some of the catalysts? So I've touched on a few of these, but again, what's driving this update? So we know buildings in Redmond actually account for about 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions, so critical that we address those. It's also more cost effective to build buildings more efficient now, right, rather than retrofit them later. And two, if we are building buildings that are going to be around for 30, 40, 50 years, we want to be sure that we're locking in infrastructure that supports our long-term climate and sustainability goals. And so, again, with these directives and there are policy directives as well, there's just a lot of great reasons for us to be moving forward with this update. So again, Kim mentioned that we've been going through a lot of stakeholder feedback over the past, or through the Phase 2 zoning code rewrite process. And we've heard a lot of different feedback. I'm just summarizing kind of the 4 key points here. First being there's a desire to keep the program voluntary. And there's also a desire for us to focus on program outcomes so that we want to achieve, not just focusing on specific green building standards. We want to continue to preserve flexibility for projects so that they can identify what works best for their developments. And then also, there was a lot of discussion around the impacts of the 2021 Energy Code update. So I mentioned, right, it's every 3 years. I'm sure you all heard about that in some of the public comment. And so I think one of the challenges that I confronted was that we were seeking public comment around the time that all of those energy code updates and that kind of thing were coming. So it made it very challenging, honestly, to tease out the impactful, or rather insightful feedback on this program itself, right? There was a lot of just concern around the energy code, which made it really challenging to get feedback on this. So I just want to flag that as kind of, that was just kind of the reality that we're in, and we're still trying to tease out good feedback from folks. Okay, so with all that in mind, our goals through this process have just been to create language that aligns with the ESAP. We really have a clear direction now on where we're going, and we want to make sure that's reflected. As I noted, this program hasn't been updated in about 7 years. A lot has changed at the policy or at the state policy level, so we need to realign with that. And then, again, we also would just want to establish really clear priorities for the community and for developers so they know where we are headed. So with that, I'm just going to walk through a summary of the program, but I do want to encourage the commissioners. Appendix 2, or B, I think, really clearly outlines what the different, we have a table in there that really clearly outlines these pieces. So the proposed update is, I would say, effectively a complete rewrite of the existing green building program that's in our current zoning code. We are continuing or proposing to continue with that voluntary program structure, as well as the points-based structure to maintain flexibility for projects. So it will have a minimum requirements to participate, and the projects can select the appropriate tactics that will get them to a certain point threshold. And I'll go through some of those optional kind of tactics here shortly. We also did not propose any new incentives through this process. The intent is that we're creating kind of a structure that other areas of the zoning code can reference. So Overlake Lake, for instance, right, they're identifying the land use incentives, and we're providing the kind of the language and the expectations, if you will. We did explore other incentives like expedited permitting and things like that, but we just feel that with workload demands and staff capacity, that focusing on land use incentives is going to be the most impactful for this program. So for program compliance, this is a new addition, we did add a penalty in the amount of 2% of the total estimated building value if the project does not fulfill their commitment. So we don't anticipate there being any issues where we'll need to leverage this penalty, but stakeholders did feel that a backstop was appropriate given that the incentives would be provided before they could actually demonstrate compliance with the program. And then we also created an appendix where we included more information about the program or program administration, and this is just a similar approach to the Stormwater Technical Notebook. So again, one of the new approaches that we're proposing is to establish minimum standards. So basically, every project that takes advantage of the Green Building Incentive Program will have the attributes listed here. And that includes, so first, that buildings must be 100% electric. And that's important because as the grid gets cleaner, thanks to the Clean Energy Transformation Act, then we'll have buildings that are ready to rely on that clean electricity rather than carbon-intensive fuels. Second, we are also proposing to require participating buildings to meet a certain energy use intensity. So this specific provision is based on the state Clean Buildings Performance Standard that I mentioned. And the intent here is that we're setting, not just that we're creating efficient buildings, but that we're also setting buildings up for long-term energy management and compliance with that state law. So we hope that we're helping them in the long term as well. And so this approach was developed in response to stakeholder feedback that we focus on outcomes, and that the outcomes that we want to see rather, and not just the specific certification programs like LEED or something like that. And then to verify compliance with item 2, we are asking that buildings earn green building certifications that require energy modeling. So they can pursue any green building certification. We're not saying you must achieve LEED or living building or anything like that. We are just, they can basically pursue something really cost effective like Energy Star, or they could do something more intensive like living building certification if that aligns with their project goals. And this, we hope, creates just a more flexible approach and is more cost-effective for some folks who don't want to prioritize necessarily deep green improvements. And then number 5, we are also outlining a specific building envelope pathway in the energy code, and this is just important to ensure buildings can meet their respective energy use intensity. And then finally, we are asking projects to earn Green Lease Leader certification. This is a fairly low barrier entry kind of approach, but basically our goal is that the benefits of having a more efficient building can be shared between the building owner and the tenant. Oftentimes when energy upgrades are made, one party is not incentivized to conserve, and so that's what the Green Lease kind of template will help incentivize. So each of the tactics here, then, are assigned a point value, which you will, again, see in the appendix. But projects, what we're asking is, again, projects on the previous, all projects must achieve the strategies that were identified on the previous slide, and then they can pick from this list to achieve kind of a minimum score from the strategies that are listed here. And I won't go through all of these, but just to highlight a couple. So first being energy storage. So again, we know as buildings and the transportation system are electrified, we just want to find ways that we are helping reduce demand on the grid. So in addition to energy efficiency, energy storage is another really great way that we can help support the grid as more, again, buildings and transportation systems are electrified. Water conservation, I will say, was a little bit harder strategy for us to address kind of from an administrative perspective. But what we are proposing is that all multifamily projects will follow Appendix M of the Uniform Plumbing Code. And this basically just allows them to look at or leverage smaller size pipes, which has efficiencies not just with water, but also energy as well. And then finally, deconstruction and then construction, demolition, and recycling are also two strategies that we are incentivizing. These are core to our Environmental Sustainability Action Plan waste efforts. And so, again, we wanted to make sure that we prioritize those here as well. So let me see. So I do want to also flag that there are absolutely more optional techniques that we could be outlining. This list could be, hundreds of actions long. So we really worked to try and balance our sustainability priorities, focusing on outcomes, and then making sure that they weren't too big of an administrative burden. So it's a delicate balance, but we are certainly open to identifying different strategies and things like that to, again, ensure that we are striking that balance. So that's the high-level overview without hopefully getting too weedy with you all. But again, Becky will be speaking, or you'll see some of the green building work in Becky's materials when she does present on that. So hopefully this just provides a good foundation for you all as you go into that conversation for the Overlake incentives. So. And I can, again, we welcome all comments, questions from the commission, and we are continuing to try and refine this. This is definitely a new strategy and approach to a green building program. So we welcome all feedback from the community as well as the commission to make sure we're putting forward the best that we can. So with that, I will just hand it back to the chair and the commission.
Okay, commissioners, do you have Commissioner Aparna?
I have a lot of questions, so I'll do one at a time and give everybody a chance. But I do want to say that this is fabulous. We are headed. I think personally, I love it. I mean, there are a few things that I would like to see added, but I like the direction, the focus on performance, the focus on flexibility for everybody who's developing, but the focus on performance, like eye on the ball, which is awesome. And I think it's looking like a very mature kind of program, so kudos. That being said, there are a couple of questions I had about the EUI. I noticed that it's based on the ASHRAE standards for existing buildings. Is there a reason why new construction was not chosen?
It's because we leverage the Clean Building Performance Standard. They basically established a UI table, if you will, that relies on the ASHRAE standard. They did do calculations for new construction buildings, which is what our values are based on. Right. And I'm happy to provide you with any of that.
Yep, your mic's not on, sorry.
Oh, no worries. I didn't quite push it right. Yeah, but I'm happy to provide any of that information too that would be helpful.
Thank you. Just a follow-up on that, given the fact that the state energy code is there's a pause on it right now, and it will probably kick back, because it's an appendix, would these numbers change if the law changes and you will keep up?
And you're talking about Appendix 10?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is part of the intent too, is that with Appendix 10, as those do change, I mean, there is some WAC language in the zoning code as well. So
Right.
we will need to, keep pace with that, and that is certainly a drawback with this approach. I mean, there's pros and cons.
No, but I think that's good that it's in the appendix, right? I mean, it'd be a little easier to just modify it based on when the new state code goes into effect, because those numbers are going to be higher and progressively so, right?
I'd like to add to what Jenny said, and fortunately, our appendices is authorized for change by the technical committee. So something like that, if connections to the RCW or WAC do change, they can easily update that within a couple weeks' time.
That is awesome. Thank you.
Commissioner Weston?
All right, so I loved the switch to using third-party standards. I think that's great. One question that I had, or clarification more, there was a question about exemptions for gas commercial cooking appliances. And I was curious if that includes a situation like an apartment building where there's a joint cooking area, or an apartment area where there's a joint grill outside. I'm really hoping those won't be included as exceptions, but I didn't see anything specifically
We note
labeling that.
specifically commercial cooking, and a little bit further back, we do get pretty specific, and I can send that language and just make sure that you think it's clear enough.
Like firm enough? Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like I think it's clear. Let me see if I can find it, and I can paste it in the chat so that we make that reference.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Commissioner Aparna?
Nobody else wants to ask questions. I have questions. So I think notably for me, what is missing in the mandatory minimum requirements is the water conservation piece. And I know that we talked about the multifamily having the plumbing code compliance, but that need not translate into fixtures that are conserving water. And if it's okay with the commissioners, I know we have a slightly shorter meeting, but I do want to bring up a major point, which I will probably make over the next few weeks. I think we should take water conservation more seriously. We have water quality standards in place. We have stormwater management in place. The new climate element has things about drought and extreme heat events. But at a programmatic building level, we need to address it. I don't know about all of you, but I've been reading enough stories to know that we can't take water for granted, and it is something that we need to study it at several levels. At Redmond 2050, we need to look at whether there's been a capacity analysis for the growth, whether the scenarios have been not just what is our current water table look like, but also what if it shrinks? We are dependent on rains, we are dependent on the glaciers not disappearing, right? So those scenario modeling, I don't know if it's been done at the different levels. So that's the higher level, which I will bring up in the other elements. But translating it to the lower element here, where we're talking about buildings, we need to talk about water conservation. So I think there were, my initial research showed no real obvious certification for water in the sustainable building green certifications. They do have like a water section or something like that. So one approach to mandating this would be, if you have a green building certification, maximize your water points or something like that. The other option, which is more direct, is to, and I will send this in an email. I've got a whole bunch of links. The GSA has put out some facilities, tools for water conservation, includes, simple things like 100% of the fixtures are low flow, water sense labeled kind of thing. It's extra work for staff who's going to be looking at it because there's no real certification, but it is, I would say that should be something that, larger projects definitely it should be mandated. We could also mandate it differently, saying, at least 50%, and then the remaining 50 goes into an incentive portion. But personally, I think that's a cop-out solution. I think, the low flow fixtures are not that much more expensive nowadays anyway. And if they are running these things and if they are required to have green lease certifications, water is part of that conversation anyway. So it's operational costs being brought down straight off the bat. So I think water should make, in all building types, be addressed. I'm happy to kind of discuss this because it's not a straightforward answer, as you know. So that's something that I believe as a commission, we should talk about it at the other elements as well. Thank you.
Sort of a follow-on to that. Is the state doing anything about water?
It's not doing as much. It's like, water conservation is good, right?
Like the state energy code, the state it's not
energy is going at a much more rapid pace. Water is not really being talked about. I do believe that is an error on our part.
Yeah. Because a huge chunk of the state doesn't have the rain that we have.
Exactly. And secondly, I think we also need to see that if it's part of a long-term thing, we can't turn around and say, hey, get me water. It takes time to plan these resources, right? As I made a very bad pun this morning, water doesn't grow on trees, okay? But it's basically when we seen the drier summer like this summer, we had, I think, 40% of the rain we normally have, 40 or 50%. We're already significantly drier. So, so I think it's about making sure that this is addressed in the long run. I don't know the short-term solutions, but we can kind of figure that out, I think. Thoughts?
Commissioner Weston.
So I agree with the increased focus on water management being a direction that it felt like it was under, like there wasn't quite enough focus on it. And I agree with pretty much everything else. I'm seeing that as potentially a weak spot. The one thing that I'm concerned about with the fixtures is that I do think it's very easy for people to substitute individual fixtures and then you lose all that benefit. The question I had is where Redmond has its own water and sewer, is there an option to say that like individual units have to have their own meters, or is there some way of doing it on that side so it could be more of an economic or like cost or fee structure later if needed. Right, because if everyone's sort of like, if water is sort of anonymous, like if the usage of it is anonymous, then people can't really be incented the same way as they can if they have a meter and they know exactly what they're paying.
I want to add one thing. On the green lease side, metering for water and energy are recommended. Just as an FYI, but that's more commercial as opposed to residential.
And this would be pulling it specifically into the residential space
To the
also.
multifamily space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, but definitely can get back to you and talk.
But that might be an option that would, because I really do like the reduction in staff time and trying to just like front load the structure to make it like kind of set up an environment where we're getting what we want. So that could potentially be a way to do it. And then if we come to a point 10 or 15 years from now where we're really conscious of the water use, then the meters are all there.
Yeah.
Nothing needs to be retrofit.
Added to that is the long-term thing. If you look at the step above what we're discussing right now, the step would be that whatever we're doing for energy, we would track that for water. So the benchmarking for water consumption, I mean, over time, that's a direction we should ideally move, but we're not nowhere close to that yet because energy we've been talking about for some time now. So it's part of the conversation. This is a new entrant, if you will, right? So start small but significant and then add something on. Or at least leave the door open for something beyond, you know?
Other commissioners? Go ahead, Aparna.
Sorry.
No,
A couple of things on the data center. I know that the data center EUI is not listed, and they have their own rating for that. I forget. I've done it at work. The thing is, if we are all, let's say the whole city is going super efficient on stuff, and we're relying completely on an electric grid, right? Now, let's say one company decides to put in a hotshot data center. It's a very innocuous building. Nobody's going to know, but it's a data center. It is going to grab everything the grid has. So from a perspective of if we're all going to rely on the same grid, we need to have some checks and balances for data centers in terms of efficiencies. That requires a little bit of research because I know they themselves want to keep the energy costs low there. So they, like the biggie companies are working towards significant reductions by, you know, heat transfer and a whole bunch of stuff. But I'll give you an example of why I am saying this, okay? My company has a data center. I've not named the company, but most of you know maybe. It's on the other coast, this data center, okay? It's completely electric. It's fairly efficient, but it's not super efficient or anything, okay? It's running well. Come storm season, because it's in the Northeast, the city calls up the data center and says, hey, we can't support you right now. So they switch, and I kid you not, for a whole month, they're running on diesel generators because the grid can't take it. Okay, now we start off with the premise that, oh, it's all electric and therefore emissions are low. Well, you're running diesel for a whole month with the data center. Okay, they've done some improvements in terms of efficiencies, but it's just, of course, the city gave some credits and, you know, the money changed hands, whatever. But what I'm trying to say is if you go all electric, these kind of energy saps are the ones we need to watch out for and be aware.
Well, data centers in general are something that you need to be careful before you let into your city.
Right.
It's because you want to talk about water. Water usage in data
Exactly.
center is
That's the other one in a
enormous.
couple of other smaller cities, like I think, was it Quincy or something that had some issues with water? So not saying we shouldn't have them, but we should have some safeguards as to what their efficiencies look like.
Commissioner Loya Camino.
Following up on Commissioner Parna's point on that and safeguarding about like how much of an energy draw is coming out is also inside of our multi-family housing developments, we've got vulnerable demographics that are typically there as well. I know that we've had several instances where power goes out for whatever the reason, power goes out and it's senior housing. And now they're in a precarious situation because of heat, and they're very vulnerable towards heat, and it happens during the summer. So making sure that if we're going to be going completely electric, and there's not the same breezeway and cooling capacities that a single-family home would have, what are we putting in place to protect our most vulnerable in the multifamilies?
Commissioner Parna.
Sorry, this is absolutely the last one, okay? As an optional for the incentives, one of the lists, I know the list is long, but local materials or like, I don't know, we have to define local as maybe Northwest or something like within, I don't know, X number of miles or something like that. Because that would be nice. It's just a sort of support to businesses as well. And because we don't talk about embodied carbon in the materials at all. So either local materials, or we can talk about durable materials or sustainable materials. Sustainable is a very broad term because it's just sustainably sourced, or does it last? So it's a little confusing in terms of usage, but I like the term durable because, like it's not a use and throw, that automatically becomes sustainable, right? But again, it's a construction technique, so it could go with the envelope standards in some way.
A question for you, how might embodied carbon fit into that conversation? I know you mentioned it, but do you see that them being mutually exclusive?
The embodied carbon piece, I don't think we should touch. It is an extremely complicated segment, and unless you want to have an extremely high tier of incentives, which says, let's go completely low carbon where they're accounting for their embodied carbon. And that's an expensive certification, that's an expensive proposition as it stands right now. But if you want to leave the door open, you can create the impossible building, right? Which says this is the embodiment of everything that we want, right? And give them everything they would like. But it is, it's not going to be an easy sell. And there has to be somebody really motivated because they want to build a sustainable building. They're not going to do it for the incentives. They're going to want to do it because they want to be on the map of the net zero buildings or the net zero carbon buildings or a flagship enterprise of some sort. So motivation is going to be very limited on those.
And I'm not sure we have the kind of information that we need to support that in an incentive
Actually,
program.
there's a growing database of low carbon materials, at least for the big ticket items. And actually, Seattle is spearheading that whole thing. There's a Carbon Leadership Forum. CLF is doing a lot of research. They've got a database also, which is pretty sophisticated. But I wouldn't put this as a regular thing. It would have to be a standalone, somebody special kind of thing. I don't know if that's making sense, but
Commissioner Weston.
So I had a question on a different topic. The energy benchmarking data being shared with the city, how does that work? Is it the same as the program that was passed last time and it's just extending, or is it a new program?
This would be a new program, or kind of a new element, but basically Portfolio Manager, it's a government-run website, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but it allows easy sharing of data where it's just basically read-only access. And this is actually a very common, benchmarking ordinances are very fairly common. Seattle has one, for instance, and it's basically the first step in helping existing buildings reduce their energy use, right? So if they're monitoring their data, then in theory, they're likely going to do something to help reduce it. And then it provides us with valuable data too as we're developing programs. So for instance, Bellevue and Issaquah are helping compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, and that gives them access then to some of the energy data within their community. It just, again, helps inform programs and things like that. So it's a valuable tool. It's not the end-all be-all, but again, it's a valuable tool for our programming.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then just one follow-up on that. Does do they have to provide this on an ongoing basis? And then is there city support around that? Or is it something where it's just like a dashboard and then they've provided and they've fulfilled their obligation?
Yeah, and it's automatically uploaded.
Great.
Through PSC and things like that. There's an automatic kind of link. So it would be very little effort on their part. And the intent is that it would be ongoing, that it wouldn't just be like, here's your 1 month of data, but that it would be an ongoing kind of, an ongoing process. So, and very little work on their part, and same with on ours. Just basically to your point, it's a dashboard that we see on our side.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'd like to add to that. Typically, the programs that have been developed, Seattle's already doing this, but so is Boston. So I know this because it's part of my work. What they do is they ask for the benchmark data once a year. You upload everything, consumption data and so on. And it not only tracks, they give incentives if you're doing well, but more importantly, from the utility providers' perspective, it allows them to optimize the grid based on usage. So if you delve a little deeper, you can go into how much is being used, peak times, all of that stuff. And that really helps the providers plan for the grid, especially in peak events like a storm, whichever way you look at it, like heat or cold, right? So that's one part. And the second part is it helps cities, and this has happened in Boston, where they collect it for a few years and then they tweak the regulations, right? So they're saying, hey, you're doing this much, maybe do this much more, or have conversations about electrifying or district heating or what have you. So that's local conversations. So it sets the stage. Without the data, we don't know anything. And secondly, Portfolio Manager is ridiculously easy to use. Even a small-time facility manager can use it. It's not too difficult. So the bar is, like she said, it's extremely low. So it's run by the EPA. So it's their thing. They get the data and they nationally norm, so it's also helpful for their data across the country. So, yeah.
Anybody else? I have a couple of questions. How do our green building incentives compare to other cities in the area?
So it really varies. A lot of cities, so for instance, Mercer Island, within their zoning code for their downtown area, they require LEED gold, right, just for that area. Kirkland recently passed some new policy language that any buildings that receive kind of land use incentives, if you will, have to meet a certain, but they are specifying specific green building standards within a lot of their work. But I can definitely provide you with a list of some of those. Seattle is definitely the leader. Shoreline was a big inspiration. Seattle and Shoreline were the two big inspirations for our policy updates. But yeah, there's a lot of different work going on, but I can definitely provide that summary for you.
I'm sure it's a moving target. And you said that in the developer feedback, it was sort of hard to tease out the reactions to this versus the reactions to the 2021 State Energy Code. Are you seeing a lot of pushback from developers about this?
No, and when I am getting to talk with them about the Clean Buildings Performance Standard and things like that, I've not received any pushback, and it may be because the program is proposed as voluntary.
Okay.
I don't know, but again, I've had pretty explicit conversations with multiple developers that we work pretty closely with, and I've not gotten any big red flags from folks.
Okay.
But again, that could be just the voluntary.
That's Good.
I would just want to, I'll put in the chat the Seattle's building performance standard. So they have a data visualization tool, so where they basically uploaded all of the information from the buildings within their program. So it's a really great way to show how the data can be used, the benchmarking data can be used to help inform programs, so.
Great. Anybody else? Okay, thanks a lot, Jenny. Okay, we'll move on to the Redmond 2050 monthly update briefing. And Jeff.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to a bonus meeting of the Redmond Planning Commission for August. I am pleased tonight to update you on Redmond 2050, although I think most of your agenda items are Redmond 2050, so you're probably pretty plugged into what's going on. The main thing that's highlighted in the memo is the schedule for the remainder of the project. And I think there's kind of some near-term smaller changes and then longer-term change in approach that won't really change the work that the commission is doing, or really the review that the council does either. So smaller near-term, we're extending the timeline on the housing regulations and the overlay regulations based on the input that we have received so far. So that work is ongoing, and we expect to bring those back to the Planning Commission in November, and that's now reflected in your extended agenda that's on the website. And then longer term, the change really is that we will continue to bring all of the elements and regulations in the same sequence that we had been planning to do that, but that the city council would, again, review them sequentially, but not adopt anything until the end. So the end being in October 2024. This does a number of things. It allows us a little bit more time for those near-term items like housing and overlay without a December 2023 kind of staring us in the face. I know it's only August, but December feels like tomorrow. It also allows the commission, the council, the community to really digest the supplemental draft EIS and the final EIS. We expect the supplemental draft in mid-September and the final EIS after Thanksgiving or early December. The supplemental draft is something like 500 pages. So there's a lot of information there, and it gives everybody plenty of opportunity to digest that, to understand what we believe the impacts will be of the decisions that we make, so that the Planning Commission, City Council, community can feel like they're making informed input and informed decisions. So that's another reason. It also will, we had been, housing and overlay had been on the fast track, overlay especially because people were really interested in building things in overlay right now. So that has changed. Economic conditions have changed. Interest rates are higher. So that's no longer a need to get things done right now. So there's time to continue the review, get additional input, and continue to bring it forward and have it adopted in 2024. As I said, that's not going to affect the sequence of events kind of for the Planning Commission or really the timeline. It just means that the ordinance doesn't get adopted for anything until October 2024, with the exception of the park plan, because the Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office needs that by the end of the year. So the Planning Commission's already made a recommendation on that. City Council will will take up the Commission's recommendation starting next Tuesday at their meeting, and then we will ask the Council to adopt that before the end of the year. So that's the exception. There are some photographs, which is really nice, of some of the community engagement that's happened over the last month. And then just for your planning information, the September 26th Pint with Planner will be rescheduled. It says tentative, so it is going to be rescheduled. And the reason is we're going to be at the city council that night also. And we didn't think doing Pint with the Planner and a city council study session on the same night was a good idea. So it'll be rescheduled, so look for a new date on the website for that, but same location at Flat Stick there. You may have already talked about this, but it was the 17th, I think, of August was the Art Walk downtown. It was a really warm evening, but we got to talk to a lot of people who stopped by because there was a lot going on. And I think one thing we learned through that was having our table out there as part of a bigger event. We already knew this, but the Art Walk proved to be a great place to run into people because there are lots of people out there. It was a nice evening, if a bit warm. Last thing I'll report, this is very recent, but we've been contacted by students at Redmond High School who were inspired by one of the events that Eastside for All organized earlier this month, because some of their family members had attended, and they would like to partner with us to organize some outreach. So we're really excited about that and are looking forward to it.
Commissioner Aparna.
Hey, Jeff. And commissioners also. I don't know if you read the memo, but I was a little concerned about some of the language, and I'm just trying to understand this and put together two sentences which I would like to read out. I understand there are short-term economic headwinds right now from a development standpoint, but 2050, I believe, is a long-range plan. So while I think we should give a nod to short-term issues with projects which are already underway, we should not be pursuing short-term issues as the norm. We need the long-range vision to be strong and take us where we want to go. So what that means is, like, again, keep the eye on the ball kind of thing. And Jeff, I know in your memo you have talked about the economic headwinds faced right now. But I do not believe that our reaction to we cannot pivot all of the planning to only address those headwinds, which could get over in a year, 2 years, 5 years. At some point, it will change the cycle, and these are cyclical, right? So it's going to change, and so we need to have a balance, but it has to be more towards the longer range. I don't know if that's making sense. I don't even know if it's an actionable item, but it's just something I felt when I was reading the memo.
Yeah, I think what the memo is saying is that there was some pressure to accomplish some parts of the plan earlier, but the economic headwinds have removed that pressure.
Oh, okay, then I misunderstood, sorry.
Okay.
But your point is well taken.
Pardon?
Your point is well taken regardless, that these conditions change very quickly. We can't respond to every change in economic conditions by bringing the Planning Commission a new set of code revisions to look at, because that would be impossible. So your point is well taken.
When we hear from the developers, I think we should listen, but also weigh whether these issues are short-term or long-term. Like, is it a perennial, chronic issue which is going to keep coming up? Or is it something they're facing as a stress right now? Not knowing is a stress for them right now, or whether they're, what is the word, vested, grandfathered in, whatever those words are. But not knowing where they lie or what is expected of them, that uncertainty I understand. But we cannot, we should address that, I think. But beyond that, I think we should look at the city's needs significantly. At least that's my, and please respond.
Commissioner Nueva Camina.
Commissioner Parna, I completely co-sign that. In my day-to-day job as a financial planner, I'm always looking at 30 years out. That is always what, if I'm working with somebody, I'm looking on average 30 years out, and understanding that there's going to be high emotions both ways in the short term, but reminding, but we're looking 30 years out. We can see what the market does. It's cyclical. This will rebound. And maybe we do need to adjust little by little, but for the right now, just let's keep our eyes down there. So co-signing on that.
As you get a little older, that range starts shortening. Anything else, Jeff?
I will only reiterate what you said earlier, Chair Nichols, which is that if you have comments on the overlay materials that we didn't get to discuss tonight, please do send them to Becky. She would love to have them.
Great. Anything else from commissioners tonight? Okay, then I look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned.